Welcome to Resilient. I'm Sarah Fedele, and I lead the U.S. Internal Audit practice at Deloitte and host the Chief Audit Executive track of this podcast series. How can I help ease your way? This powerful prompt brings to light that empathy is the foundation of how we can all help one another. When it comes to how internal audit can help ease the way, Providence St. Joseph Health's Andrew Tinseth has some novel ideas. Andrew serves as the Vice President of Internal Audit at Providence, and he brings a wealth of experience as a professor, CAE, financial accountant, and IT internal auditor. Let's hear what he has to say. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself, what some of your experiences have been, and also a bit about your current role at Providence.
I've been at Providence for about a year and 3 months. Started during COVID, which is a very interesting experience. Prior to Providence, I was the head of internal audit at the University of Southern California, which included being the chief audit executive for the university as well as Keck Medicine of USC. And prior to that role, I was in the classroom at USC as a professor in the School of Business as well as the School of Accounting. I like to think of that as kind of the sabbatical of my career. It was something I always wanted to do and really enjoyed doing it, but I missed the work, and so I went back into internal audit. I like to think of myself as a walk the beat type of auditor. I like to get out and talk to folks and understand, see where they work and see their teams and try to develop a relationship with them personally, which is really hard to do virtually. But what I tried to do was do the best I could to make a connection virtually and try to find something to connect with them. One of the best examples I had was one of our regional chief executives had a water polo ball on his credenza in his office. And I played water polo in high school and college. And so I started talking to him about water polo. It was a great icebreaker. The silver lining of it is that you did get an opportunity to kind of see something personal about them through these meetings.
Yeah, it is nice that everybody was on the same playing field when everyone went virtual basically overnight. I'm curious to pull a bit from your background in education and that time you spent, what you call the sabbatical. What did you learn during that time that you've taken forward into being a CAE at USC and then now at Providence? Any takeaways from just how you were as an educator that's fed into either how you manage your team or interact with your stakeholders?
What I really liked about taking that, what I call the sabbatical, to go teach for a couple of years is it gave me an opportunity to step away and get a different perspective on the role. And if and when I went back, how I might do it differently. The primary class that I taught was accounting information systems. And in that class, the idea was to teach the students general business process, risk, and control over the entire business cycle, and then also overlay technology and how those two meet and why that's important. And so the first half of the class, you had to understand a procurement process and a revenue process and et cetera. But the second half of the class is where we really got into the technology. And one of the things that I really tried to hone in on was the use of data and data analytics and data visualization and some of the tools to make this data come alive and really tell a story. And then as I looked at coming back into an internal audit role, it was really, how can we use that data to tell the story of how the organization is operating, how effective are the controls, what can we do to add value to the organization through the use of these tools. You got an opportunity to get away from your day-to-day, the pressures of your day-to-day role as internal audit, to explore the use of technology to help us do what we do.
Yeah, it actually feeds into one of the things I've heard from your team, which is that you have a passion for getting outside of the internal audit, quote unquote, box. And so I'm curious from your standpoint, what does an outside of the box internal auditor do that's different?
Well, I think it's a few things. I'll be honest, I have a kind of a quirky personality. I'm very irreverent and self-deprecating. I don't take myself too seriously, take the job seriously, but I try not to be that intimidating internal auditor guy. I also like to try to push the envelope on that third line of defense. I mean, I really like the structure of that model. I think it's a good theoretical model. But from an internal auditor perspective, I really try to do whatever we can to drive value to the business without, breaking that independence line. There's certain ways you can go about it. You got to be careful, and you got to make sure you're communicating to everyone what exactly you're trying to do. Make sure everyone's okay with that. Everyone from the audit committee to your executive management team to your external auditor and any other stakeholder you have. A perfect case in point is right now during COVID, a lot of organizations, if they've received FEMA money or any type of grants from the government, you're going to need someone in your organization to handle that. Monitor what did you receive that you spent in order to get this money back. And at some point, the government's going to come and ask to see documentation. I looked at that as a prime opportunity for internal audit, because who better to handle that than us, those who typically are accountants and finance folks and understand documentation and understand being audited. It's definitely an operational role, but I look at it as it's kind of a one-time thing. And in a period of crisis, it's a great opportunity for us to demonstrate our value. And we're never going to be able to audit what we set up, but you can always go externally.
I'm glad you brought up value as a topic, because that's a question that I get asked very frequently in my role, is just how is internal audit measuring value and reporting out on value? And so I'm curious if you have a way that you measure value that that internal audit's delivering, or are there any specific metrics that you're using for that?
That's a really good question. In my career as in internal audit, I hear of many different metrics on how people measure the value that internal audit has brought. And I've never really subscribed to any of the more popular measures, such as number of reports issued or number of observations issued or anything like that. For me, it's very simple. When you go in and do an audit of an area, how was the experience for the auditee, and whether they invite you back in the future to do additional work? Because I think what that tells you is that they appreciated what you did. It was a reasonably enjoyable experience, I guess, if they're asking you back. And most importantly, they felt that you brought value. And if you didn't, they wouldn't invite you back. So it's not a real complicated or sophisticated metric, but I think it's pretty effective.
Well, it's intangible, and I think that's largely what some struggle with, is not having a tangible way of recording value. But I'm curious on that intangible piece. Like, is there something that you and your teams are doing that drive that repeat business and that experience for the auditee?
Well, yeah. When we go and look to perform an audit, there's obviously a reason why you're performing that audit. There's a risk that you're trying to assess or see if it's mitigated. But what I try to do when I go into scope an audit, have a meeting with the process owners and process participants, one of the things I always try to incorporate into that audit is something that we can do that would be helpful for them. So I asked the question specifically, is there anything we can do to help you? Is there anything that you would like assessed? I mean, we have some resources. We can look into an area, whatever we can do to help you as part of this audit, and always try to incorporate that into the work.
So I know you've embraced Agile as a methodology for the internal audit function, and that's very much a part of that methodology, is understanding how the audit can benefit the auditee. Can you talk a bit about your experience with the Agile method and your team's experience with it?
Sure. I would say that I am an absolute zealot of Agile. I love the approach from beginning to end. And it's interesting, as it started to evolve and come around, I like to think that there was portions of Agile audit that we were doing, me and my teams were doing, even before it was officially named Agile. And beginning to end, I see Agile as kind of a mindset. You basically don't get stuck to a certain approach or pattern. You're always kind of thinking and rethinking how you're going to do what you do. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just plow ahead, see what you learn, and then change course if you have to. one of the things that I was doing years back was, I was trying never to be married to an internal audit plan. The audit plan is very important, but things are changing so rapidly, and it just seems to be that they're changing even more rapidly, that I've always tried to have a relationship with the audit committees and the executives that I served and worked with to try to have them allow me the flexibility to make the changes to the audit plan and the audits and our approach as necessary to best serve the organization. So, a recent project that we were doing, it started off as an internal audit of a certain area. As we got into it, we realized that the process was still somewhat being formed. So it didn't make sense to do an audit of a process that wasn't well defined. So instead, we switched it to an advisory project to try to help them kind of storm and form their approach and what they were doing. And then by the time we got to the end of it, we realized that there just wasn't a whole lot of risk there, and it wasn't the best use of our time. So what we did is we made the decision that, look, we're just going to cut it off right now. Instead of writing a formal memo, writing a formal report and get observations and write observations and get action plans. It was just, let's just scrap it. Let's just write a memo, send the memo over, and then move on to the next project. So it's really, again, here's one of these opportunities where we came in, we thought we were doing something, we reassessed on the fly, changed it again, and then basically just cut it off and moved on to the next thing. And so that's what I really like. It gives you that flexibility. And like I said, I've always been blessed to work with audit committees and boards that would allow me the flexibility and had faith in my judgment on where we should be spending our time.
That's great, because that is one of the challenges I hear most frequently, is just having some pushback from the audit committee about, not having an annual plan or not executing every audit on the annual plan, and not being allowed the flexibility to change up the audits based on what they're seeing from a risk standpoint happening with the business.
Yeah, well, we have an annual plan. We say this is what we think our approach is going to be for the year. But what's nice is that the audit committee knows that things are going to change and gives us that freedom to change it as we see necessary.
Mm-hmm. So as you work on the audit plan changes, knowing that the risks are ever changing, how do you stay ahead of that? Is it a formal risk assessment, conversations with management? Like, what are you doing to help drive that change to the audit plan throughout the year?
Well, we have a number of different inputs into our plan, probably 6 or 7 different inputs. One of the inputs is we work very closely with our integrated risk management function. And so that group does the formal risk assessment. We also bring in the compliance team's risk assessment. We talk to a number of people out in industry. I reach out to various firms, think tanks, peers at other healthcare organizations. I like to think I have a case of risk FOMO, fear of missing out on anything. So I really go out and I'll talk to anyone to understand what they're working on and share with anyone what we're working on and make sure we get it all covered.
I love that, risk FOMO. So one of the things that I love about Providence is the Providence Promise, which, for those that don't know, is know me, care for me, ease my way. And I've heard from you before, and I've heard from your team just how this is embraced as auditors and going into the audits that you're doing. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, how you've put that promise into action in internal audit at Providence.
That is absolutely the promise. And that's one of the things I heard early on when I joined. One of my first meetings, I had one senior exec literally open up the meeting with, "How can I ease your way?" I heard the promise, but to see it was really remarkable. We openly use that statement. I mean, what can we do to ease your way? It could be everything from, like I mentioned before, about what can we add into the audit that would be helpful for the person being audited. Maybe it's an area that they've always wanted an independent assessment of, or whatever it is. It could be that, or it could be, can we be flexible with the timing of the audit? If that would be helpful, if there's something particular going on, that this just isn't a good time, or if the audit must continue, we do whatever we can to try to help them and support them. And I try not to be the big, scary, formal auditor. I try to connect with people emotionally and understand that they're a real person. And hey, I'm a real person too. And what can I do to help? We'll also even go as far as when we're trying to put together management action plans, we ask them, would it be helpful if we were to have a working session with you and we can help draft these for you? Whatever we can do to make life easier on them and not feel like, oh, I just got, pummeled by an audit, we do that.
I love it. And for those listening, I think it's important to know also that the employees at Providence are collectively known as caregivers. And so if you think about an auditor going in as a caregiver to do their audit and to talk about how we can ease the way of that business leader, it brings a whole different lens to the role of internal audit, I think, for an organization, which is fantastic. Andrew, I want to pivot a bit and talk about innovation, because one of the things that I've heard about you and that we've talked about a little bit is around the idea of internal audit being an innovation incubator. And so I'm curious what you're doing related to that at Providence.
As a professor, one of the things I really enjoyed was talking about and teaching data analytics, data visualization. And what I'm focusing on is, how do we bring technology to make our jobs more efficient, more effective, and ultimately, if we were to able to provide a tool as a byproduct of what we do to the organization. So I've told the team, every single audit that we do, I want there to be some type of data analytics or visualization component to it. And we're starting to collect all the different sets of data that are out there and what's in that data. What I'm trying to do is bring all of that data into a sandbox of sorts for us, so we can start using some of these data analytics and data visualization tools to help us understand the business better, get our work done more efficiently, and then try to provide some insight or solutions to the organization. So I'll give you an example. We recently performed a review around shadow IT. And the purpose of the project was obviously to see if there's any groups of IT systems, applications, services that are outside of the purview of the IT department. And the way we did it was a very novel approach. A lot of times groups, when they want to go do this types of audit, they'll go talk to various folks in and around IT or other folks that they think might be procuring their own IT products and services. They'll go and kind of pound the pavement and figure it out that way. We actually took a different approach. We took all of the expense data around the organization and threw it all into a data analytics tool and sliced and diced the data a bunch of different ways and created some visualizations and provided that to IT. And IT actually found it very interesting. And we thought, wow, procurement might actually find this interesting. They actually were very excited about it because it was a dashboard of things that they were wanting to or starting to create themselves. So we were able to provide a solution to a problem that they were having. And now we're going to do the same thing to finance. And so I looked at that as that was the home run win. It was an opportunity for us to do something we were going to do anyway, but as a byproduct, we were able to add value and provide a tool to these three different groups within the organization. And then ultimately, we're going to keep that data updated. And so we'll have this little sandbox, and we're going to be updating the data every month or quarter, and have that out there for their use whenever they need it.
Okay, Andrew, we're going to close this out with a lightning round. So what's the secret to becoming a trusted advisor to the business?
I would say being approachable and having people have the confidence in you that you can help them solve their problem.
What are the attributes of a resilient internal audit executive?
A good sense of humor.
How might you have answered that question pre-pandemic?
I would say still a good sense of humor.
Okay. And then lastly, what are the qualities that will help other chief audit executives and other leaders in general as we emerge from this pandemic that we've been in for such a long time?
I think really trying to be empathetic to the people in the organization, trying to understand or at least acknowledge that we don't know what they're going through. And so really try to ease their way and connect with them and help them however possible.
What gives you hope or makes you optimistic about the future?
I'm excited about the cutting edge technology that's out there and how we've proven that we can quickly adapt to these new technologies.
Yep. Will help ease our way for sure.
Will help ease our way.
Andrew, you're an inspiration to me. From leading with empathy, you've demonstrated how you build deep and mutually beneficial relationships with other leaders, different parts of the business, and with the audit committee. Your adaptability and agility as you lead your team and engage your stakeholders, it clearly lets you focus on what matters to the organization. I was equally impressed with your ability to combine technology and innovation to deliver remarkable value to the business. You've given us a lot to think about in how we approach our next internal audits. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. I welcome your thoughts on who we can bring to you next. Send me a LinkedIn message at Sarah Fedele, spelled Fedele. Want to know more about what's new, now, and next for internal audit? I encourage you to visit our Chief Audit Executive site on Deloitte.com. You can also listen to our CAE series on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay safe and remain resilient.